Good day, YouTubers. As part 3 of my review of Ontario Northland models that have been manufactured in HO, I'd like to take a look at Atlas RS-3s, as can be seen in the foreground here. Now, my effort here has been to review all of the more vintage items first, and the vintage RS-3s by Atlas are the next logical step in my opinion, but I am going to talk about the later releases of RS-3s as well. Now, Atlas entered the market of HO locomotives by working with Rocco of Austria to produce a range of mostly EMD locomotives, and these represented some of the earliest commonly referred to as yellow box locomotives. Now, I'd be remiss by not mentioning here that some of these early Austrian-built locomotives were the basis for custom-painted locomotive projects for Ontario Northland modelers. The vintage FP7A locomotive in particular by Atlas/Rocco was the model used by most modelers looking to represent an Ontario Northland FP7A. So the example that I have here is not something that I painted myself, but something that I found used in a local hobby store. Just to run it here for a second so that you can appreciate how well that Austrian-built drive still runs, especially when you consider the age of the locomotive. Very silky operation. Now again, still in partnership with Rocco of Austria, Atlas manufactured a number of EMD hood units, such as this GP40, that has been painted and numbered to reflect an Ontario Northland GP38. So to run this here as well. This one again runs not too bad. A little noisy, but again still pretty smooth, especially for a locomotive of this age. Now, back to the RS-3. Now, Atlas started to work with Kato of Japan for a series of locomotives, including the RS-3, as can be seen here, in the mid-1980s. This included this run of Ontario Northland RS-3s that were made available in two different road numbers, number 1301 and 1306. I have 1301 here. I don't have 1306 in my collection as of yet, but I'm always looking. These were sold again in a very similar yellow box, but location of the manufacturer was identified differently on the box. I know some people love looking at boxes and old marketing, so let me show you here. If I can keep it in focus. So this one here says made in Austria and is the box specific to the GP40. And the box here is specific to the RS-3, made in Japan. So Kato, of course, went on to produce their own line of locomotives and cars in later years. Just to run this here again a little bit more. Still runs quite well for a locomotive of this age. I'm talking a little bit more about the appearance of the locomotive here. Overall, the general appearance and the paint scheme are a reasonable representation of an Ontario Northland locomotive, but the colors are definitely a bit off. They're a bit dull. The green is definitely much too, I don't know, almost too glossy. Here, a great comparison is a unit from Atlas's next release of Ontario Northland RS-3s. So Atlas started to make their own RS-3s in the early 2000s, I believe, and it was in partnership with Hobbycraft Canada that this run of RS-3s was manufactured somewhere around 2005 or 2006. It was only offered in this one road number, and this built-in China drive mechanism. I've heard some people call this a Kato clone, but it does seem to operate remarkably well. Now the colors and paint scheme here are much more accurately representative, or much more accurate representation of an Ontario Northland locomotive than the previous model that we showed you. Now on to later versions. It was in 2007 that Atlas offered this RS-3 in the final paint scheme for Ontario Northland RS-3s, which was the chevron paint scheme. And it's definitely a very attractive locomotive. So bear with me here for a second while I make the changes necessary to flip to DCC operation, because this particular locomotive has an aftermarket card that was installed by the previous owner. But the drive characteristics are very similar to the locomotive illustrated just previous. Runs nice and smooth and quiet. Now Atlas was referring to this run of RS-3s that continue into production here today as Atlas Classic. Now again, people would love to see the box, so I'll show you the box here as well. I'll show you the shell for the second road number that was offered. So they offered road number 1308 and 1306. I don't have a chassis for my unit 1306, but it's on the list. So sorry, I know this is much too close, but I've been focusing on my locomotives instead here. So the Atlas Classic packaging that we still see today. As a comparison, I'd like to compare these locomotives to some other market offerings. So bear with me a second here while I pull these off the tracks. And what I'm putting on the tracks here are the RS-3s that were offered by Lifelike as per their Proto 1000 product range, somewhere in the early 2000s. And the locomotive paint scheme here, the green classic paint scheme, is very comparable to 1307 that we looked at a minute ago. And what Proto 1000 also offered was the as delivered paint scheme here, the green and the stripes. We'll talk about these locomotives more and run them in some subsequent videos where we're talking about Lifelike products. But I wanted to show them off here briefly and just point out a few interesting little details. You'll notice here on the RS-2 model, as provided by Lifelike, that there's a different exhaust configuration and some different body configuration elements as well, such as the location of the battery boxes. Now, this is how the RS-2s were delivered, and the RS-3s were somewhat the same in regards to exhaust configuration. Ontario Northland did eventually retrofit all of their RS-2s to reflect RS-3 manufacturing considerations, and as part of this, the exhaust stack was reconfigured. So 1307 and the Chevron unit that we just previously looked at, they are accurate in having this exhaust stack in the configuration shown. I'm not aware of any Ontario Northland RS-2s or RS-3s that maintained this exhaust stack style after being repainted into the classic green scheme. If any subject matter experts out there know better, feel free to reach out. And I hope you enjoyed my video, and I'll work to get another one up very soon. Thank you.